Now, this is African Bank's share price over the last 5 years. In 2012, shares trading as high as 30 Rand. Now, African Bank started to falter in about March last year after the National Credit Regulator said it had been involved in reckless lending. Bad debts rose as the bank's clients struggled to repay. So there we see it slumped to around 6 Rand. Then today there was that free fall. By 3 o'clock this afternoon, it was already trading at below 3 Rand. So from 30 to 3 Rand, quite an incredible drop. You can just see that demise once more. The newly acting CEO, formerly the CFO, Nithya Nalia, was speaking on a conference call a very short while ago. He says the bank needs another cash injection of 8.5 billion Rand, which is more than its current market capitalization.
Given that I think it's almost to the day that we're announcing another rights issue, and we definitely have got no intention of coming in announcing a third rights issue. So the board has decided to be cautious and rather raise slightly more capital if that's what ends up being the case, and then one can always return that surplus capital if we raise that. We hope to be able to do the work, detailed work, as I said, before the end of August and come through to the market, explain what that is, and then ensure that we've got, bearing in mind the capital also supports the funders, puts confidence back for them. So we need to do that to get the liquidity back at the levels that they were historically prior to the start of our crisis in early 2013.
Well, an important statement this afternoon. The Reserve Bank says it's monitoring the situation closely. Some are asking if the Reserve Bank will step in if the bank is too big to fail. The Reserve Bank says it's engaging with the board and senior management to find a long-term solution. It says there are no indications that other banks have been negatively affected by ABLE. Well, African Bank will be looking to those investors for a bailout if it hopes to survive. One of the major investors, the PIC, has called it a bottomless pit, though, and says it should be closed. Well, let's discuss now. We're joined by Owen Nkomo, and he's from Nkunzi Investors. Thank you for joining us, Owen.
Thank you.
I guess the first question is that, is it too big to fail, or are we looking at the end, barring the closing of the doors?
You know what, you mentioned that the other banks have not been affected negatively by what's going on in the unsecured lending space. And I think African Bank has got such a big market share in that area. And unfortunately, I don't think that, or rather fortunately, I don't believe that there's a push through to the rest of the banks should African Bank fail. But I think that this business in the past year has raised north of 5 billion rands in capital to make sure that they improve the balance sheet of the business and they can continue their day-to-day operations. They've got thousands of branches across the country, and you know, they have managed to serve that need for people who cannot get funding from the mainstream banks. They've managed to help those people. People who have been working in the mining space have managed to get loans just because of African Bank. And it's quite unfortunate that events have turned to what they have now, with the economy turning negatively and affecting African Bank in a manner that it has.
Well, two questions there. Is it really a good thing that it's been able to give out these microloans? We know at one stage it was being looked at for reckless lending, and you spoke about the miners. We know a lot of them got into serious trouble with unsecured loans.
You know, I think that there's definitely a lot of elements that African Bank can be pointed at for being a reckless lender. I personally have had experience of people that have come to us and said, I have gone to a bank and I've borrowed money, and with this money I want to trade the stock markets. You know, this is someone who cannot afford a loan, and they're taking that money for the wrong reason, and they've gone into
taking another risk.
Exactly, taking another risk, and so for that reason they cannot pay the money back to the bank. And in my view, for those practices, African Bank had probably gone too exuberant in their advancing of loans to people out there. If someone cannot afford to get a loan, just don't give them. That's why the bigger banks are insulated from this problem of unsecured lending. But remember, African Bank has got big shareholders like Alan Gray, who hold, I think, about 5% at least of the business. They were looking for value as people started, you know, to not believe that African Bank will survive. They kept buying into this business. And I imagine some of them today were buying as well. But when you get the PIC say, without 15% holding in this company, we think this thing should be shut down, then, you know, opinions start to vary. Are we going to wake up next month and African Bank is going to be around? It's a very big question in my view.
Because surely the PIC would be, because it's such a big investor,
Yep.
I think 15%,
Yes.
it would have to be part of the bailout. So if it's saying it's not wanting to be part of this, that seems to be a big problem.
Yeah, it most definitely will have to be a big participant in this. And I think for them, it'll be more a question of responsible business practices by African Bank being questioned by the PIC, more than the PIC being able to back up African Bank in manner of injecting capital. If the PIC says we're going to give them $2.5 billion and they need to get money elsewhere, then they will survive. But I think it's an easy decision for the PIC to make. They either advance the money or they say African Bank will believe your practices have been irresponsible, and that's why you've fallen from about $40 in the past 2-3 odd years to about $2 right now.
Okay, say the PIC says no, and other big investors say no, we're actually washing our hands right now. Can the Reserve Bank step in? Should it step in? Should this bank be saved?
Geez, that is a very tough one, right? I think, it says, if we do not save African Bank, what happens to people who cannot afford to get loans from the big banks? It means they have to go to the guy in the corner sitting with a hat and a knife and a gun in his hand who says, I'm going to give you money, but you're going to have to pay me 60% a month. So that's one of the questions that would need to be addressed in my view.
Well, this is interesting because
Yeah.
there is Capitec, but does this raise doubts about Capitec's future as well?
Not at all, because Capitec has got other streams of revenue. And unfortunately, African Bank went and spent a lot of money on buying Ellerines, which is not doing so well. And they're struggling right now to sell it. We were hoping in the interview that we'll hear that these guys are going to sell Ellerines to someone else out there, but that information didn't come through. We've seen the numbers from Capitec, and we're not worried about the nature of Capitec's borrowings, especially because they're more prudent as opposed to African Bank, who decided to get more creative and start lending more recklessly, if I may use that word loosely.
Right, so this is an isolated problem, and they've been speaking about selling Ellerines for a long time.
For a very long
so it
time.
doesn't look like there's a buyer there.
Yeah,
Would you buy it?
No, you know what? I mean, people talk about value, etc. They say this is a company that's got some level of assets that could still be turned around. All you need actually is someone who comes with a clever idea that will take advantage of African Bank's distribution network. You need another stream of income to come for this business. You need someone to say, okay, we're going to give you funding for the next 3-4 years so that you don't go bankrupt, but you need to pay back this money. There is talk of separating the good assets from the bad assets in the bank, an approach that we saw in the USA, but that will need the government to support that. And in my view, whatever happens in African Bank, we've got a big movie to watch here, and it's going to be very interesting.
We're running out of time, so final question.
Yeah.
Was this a massive failure of management, or you were speaking about the tough economy? Is African Bank a victim of the economy because of the customers?
I think I put the blame squarely on management, and I'll say that's why you're seeing companies like Alan Gray coming in, hoping to turn the business around in as much as they turn Super Group around. But unfortunately, for this time, I think it may be a little bit too late.
All right, thank you so much for your analysis. We'll have to watch that movie and see what happens. That was Ona Nkomo from Nkunzi Investments. Social media has been a buzz on the Able drama. Here are just some of the tweets today. Mandisi, unsecured lending has no place in a struggling economy. African Bank is led by well-experienced people, and they should know this. We have some disagreement here from our analyst, Mohil. African Bank disappointing, another rights offer to fill a hole in the balance sheet. Can management ever be believed again? Well, we do see Leon Kirkinis stepping down. African Bank trainee says is in serious trouble. The stock practically useless. Mahlanga, to think that African Bank was awarded the South African Bank of the Year award with robust models in 2012. That is quite amazing. Let's see how this all played out on the bigger picture on the market today. The JSE fell, not only due to African Bank, though. That was generally in line with losses in Asia this morning and the US overnight. Russian military activity on the Ukrainian border spooked investors today. The all-share index down by 0.5%. The banks, not surprisingly, among the worst performers. African Bank down by 61%. Incredible to say. The major banks, Standard, FirstRand, Barclays and Nedbank, all fell by around 1.5%. The gold miners were the best performers, adding more than 3%. Anglo Gold rose by close to 4%. The big resources also up, but the platinums fell by 1/5%. The gold price steady-ish. Brent crude oil bouncing back from its lowest close in 9 months yesterday after industry data showed a large drop in US crude stocks last week. And the rand is flat after its last close, still trading close to 4-week lows as tensions between Russia and Ukraine mean investors are maybe shying away from our so-called riskier asset, the currency.